Hi, it's Matt Bisogno here, and welcome to this bonus module, Module 3B, in the Researching Betting Angles series. Now, so far, hopefully you've already read or watched the preceding modules where we've talked about setting up to succeed and about how to use Query Tool and looking at various approaches largely around trainer research within Query Tool. Today I want to talk about some different things that you can research within Qt, but before that I want to kind of touch on a mistake that I think is quite a commonplace mistake when looking at these kind of databases and looking for things of utility. It tends to be the case that people are looking for kind of like, if I can be rude about them a little bit, miracle systems, golden goose systems with these massive profit and loss figures, which are almost certainly unsustainable because people fall in love with the P&L column. They tend to be a little bit forgiving or convenient when considering things that don't quite fit the overall logic of the approach. And that's fine as long as you're being selective with how you're backing these horses. If you're betting every qualifier, you need to do, the question you need to ask is not is this profitable, but rather is it logical and how can I break it? You need to be challenging your system. You need to be challenging the profitability of it. You need to be looking at the consistency from year to year. You need to be, rather than being hypnotized by the profit, you need to ask whether that profit is sustainable and does the logic underpin that sustainability. And if the answer is no, you might still keep the angle and you might use it as a kind of advisory or a markup. And it's markups that I really want to talk about today. So these are angles that are not necessarily profitable systems in or of themselves, but they are a tick in a box, an extra factor in favour of a given runner. And again, I've talked in previous modules about the fact that I'm not, very few of the systems or angles that I have are ones where I would be betting the qualifiers religiously. I want to look at a race in totality, and I want to make decisions based on all of the information, not just one pointer to one horse. That's my way. It's not the only way, but it's the approach I like, and it's the one I'm going to talk about today. So, in today's show, we will look a little bit at sires. We will look at the impact of wind surgery. And we might look at individual horse analysis, which is quite an interesting thing that you can do in the Query Tool. But we're going to start with sires, and there are kind of two ways to do this. There are top-down scenarios, so for example, sires that act well on heavy ground, and there are bottom-up scenarios, for example, Galileo has 1 million runners. Are there any preferences? Are there any subsets of his overall data that kind of lead us to think he might be, for instance, best with horses around 1 mile to 10 furlongs or on fast ground or whatever? In this video I'm going to focus more on the top-down approach, the scenario approach, which is a preferred one for me, because when a horse matches a scenario, or a sire or whatever, when an angle matches a scenario, I'm going to get my little blue number in the box on my race card, and I can quickly see when considering all the other data for that race, I've got these extra bits of information to help me make my decisions. Again, very few of these extra bits of information are going to be the single thing that makes me want a better horse. But almost always they will be a factor in my overall judgment. Okay, so again, we started off with a bit of a sermon, but I hope you can see some utility in that, some value in that, because I think it's, some people have got not very much time and they want to be quite mechanical about it, and that's fine. When I'm looking at a race, I tend to want to look at a broader range of information from which to make a decision. When looking at scenarios for things like sires, I think it's important, and in general in racing, I think when you, I think specialism is a really key element. So, for example, there are 1 million 5 furlong races. There are 1 million Class 6 or Class 5 handicaps. There's nothing in those kind of groups that would differentiate one horse or sire or whatever from any other. In actual fact, 5 furlongs might be a bad example because it's the minimum distance, so you do want speedy horses at that trip. I like the notion of in extremis in racing, and what I mean by that is things that are at the very edges of the ranges. So in terms of going, we'd be talking about firm ground, maybe good to firm ground, which a lot of horses won't act on. We'd be talking about heavy ground, certainly, which is kind of a Marmite surface. Southwell fibre sand is unique. We might be thinking about Newcastle's straight track up to a mile, certainly 6 furlongs to a mile. That's the only straight all-weather track, tapeter track as it happens in the UK. So these are kind of situations that are unique or extreme in their peer group. And I think they are quite interesting. You could look at long distance races, so you can see in this example, actually, I've just called this up, and away we go. We've got the last 5 years, and if you just check, there's nothing in the filters, so we're clean, as it were. Now, what I'm going to do, you saw in the angles box there, I had this 3.5 mile plus sire markup. So I'm going to go to my race, and unsurprisingly, I'm going to make this 3.5 miles to any, so that's 3.5 miles and up. Click generate report, and that comes back a lot more quickly. We've got 3,500 or so runs, and then I'm simply going to look at this data by sire. And then when I've got my list, this will take a bit longer because it's pulling back a very long list. I'm going to filter this list. I'm going to get rid of those sires which have only had a very few number of runners over extended distances. So I put my parameters in there and hit update. I've still got quite a bit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the impact value, and I'm going to say 1.5. So that's basically saying the progeny of these sires win 1.5 more times than their 1.5 more times or more than their peer group. And we can see in the IV column on the right hand side that they win kind of between 2.5 times in the case of Saint-Dessin on a very small sample size, and 1.5 times in the case of Marteline, also on a small sample size. But these guys are, and you might be thinking, well, this is a little bit arbitrary, a little bit back-fitted, and I don't really have a strong counter to that, because in some regards, yes, it is a little bit retrofitted, but I'm not talking. This is not a system that I'm going to bet religiously. I just want to know about those stallions, those sires, which have outperformed their peer group. I'm not really interested in this profit and loss figure. That's not what I'm interested in. I am interested in the IV, and to a lesser degree, in this case, in these kind of markup scenarios, the AE figure, that needs to be, doesn't have to be above 1, but it needs to be sort of 0.9, 0.95 plus. But I'm looking for those animals that win a good bit more than the average in their peer group. So that's basically it. And then I'm going to call this angle 3.5 mile plus sire markup, and I'm going to add that angle, and that's it. That's done. And then I'm going to forget all about that until such time as I'm looking at a race at a trip of 3.5 miles and beyond, and then I'm going to get a little message in the card for that for any runner by one of these sires. An important point about sire analysis. When a horse has done something that your analyst, so in this example 3.5 mile plus races, if I'm looking at a horse by Oscar, let's say, because he's top of this list here, if I'm looking at a horse in a 4 mile race by Oscar, and he's already run 4 or 5 or 6 times over that sort of trip, and he's run poorly every time, I don't need the sire analysis to mark him up, because I can already see that his form marks him down. Sire analysis is useful in the absence of horse form within that given context, in this case long distance races. If you've got horse form, that's what you use. You don't use sire form or analysis unless there is no horse form analysis. Okay, makes sense? Probably a very obvious point, but it's definitely worth making. So that's staying sires, and you can basically have any number of, you can have a whole bunch of angles around sires in given different scenarios. And I talked about extreme scenarios. So I've got in my list here, for example, and again they're all zeros because we're on lockdown at the moment, I have got firm flat sire markup. So let's call that one in and generate report, and you can see that that's on going ranging from good to firm to hard. It's flat turf, and it's these stallions. And again, it doesn't bother me that the P&L is negative, because I just need to clear that actually a second, because I'm not betting them all. I'm not betting them all religiously. I'm betting. I want to know that when I see a horse running at Bath on firm ground for the first time, for instance, I want to know that the stallion, the sire, gives me some hope that the horse will act on the track, because the progeny of these stallions on fast ground have outperformed their peer group by 1.5 to nearly 2 times. And that's the point. Okay, so it's a piece of information to help me in my decision making process. So you could do this for heavy ground, fibre sand, whatever you like really. And I think that's plenty on sires. There are lots of other ways you can do it. You can pick out a given sire. For instance, if we look at my angles, I have a Cable Bay 5 furlong angle, which Cable Bay was a first season sire last year, and quite early in the season it became apparent that he was getting precocious 2-year-olds that were very fast very early, and as the season wore on, those horses were running over longer trips, and perhaps arguably they didn't go on from their early precocity, but he'll have another batch of 2-year-olds this year if we ever get the season started, and I expect that there'll be quite early types over 5 furlongs. So if we look at this, you can see that it was a great little angle last year, and that of course is the whole year, which includes some of the time before I'd stumbled on this. But it was things like that when you're watching when you're watching, especially with first season sires, and very often they burn brightly but not for a long time. So it might be, Cable Bay might have had a fantastic season last year and doesn't go on this year, but he's very he was a very fast racehorse, and I do think he's imbuing his progeny with speed. If we just look at the filters, I've got this 5 furlong here. I'm just going to take the distance off and change that to any, and then we can sort by distance, and you can see that if I just sort that like that, you can see that ignore 6.5 because there's not really any, there's only 3 runners in there, but you can see that at 7 furlongs they kind of weren't getting home. They're definitely sprinters, these Cable Bays, and these are the kind of things that you'll pick up every year. People will be talking about it. It's not a fantastic secret I've unlocked, but the market does take a while to adjust. So each season it's well worth watching. Again, this is an atypical season because we've got this hiatus, but it's worth watching the 2-year-old races, which are all over 5 furlongs in April and May. I think that's right, pretty much all over 5 furlongs anyway. And you very quickly get a handle on the new stallions who are stamping their progeny with speed and precocity. So that's that. So that's an example of a bottom-up sire analysis, if you like, Cable Bay. And as I've said, he might have been a one-season wonder, so I will be treading very carefully in the early part of the season around this. But I do like Cable Bay, and I think he's got a chance to make up into a pretty smart sire of sprinters. All right, enough on sires, I think. Let's look at wind operations. I'm just going to quickly refresh the page here to get everything clean. Now, wind operations have been happening for a decade, I guess. They have been required to be declared publicly, in the UK at least, since the beginning of 2018. So what we'll do, rather than have this 5 years, is we'll change this to 2018, and you see if you just click on the month and year, you can select that period in the calendar. I think it was about the 19th, but we'll go with the 1st of January. So we've got the whole lot here, and I'm going to look at well, first of all, I'm just going to sort by wind count, and that is basically the number of runs after a wind op. So 0 is going to be hasn't had a wind op. 1 is W1 on the race card, first run after a wind op, and so on. So let's generate report there, and that's going to pull back all of the. Actually, I just want to. It's going to make a very, very slight difference, but I'm just going to select UK because we will have picked up some horses, Irish horses that were running in the UK first time after a wind op and had to be declared. So, as I say, it's a marginal difference, but let's have it right. Okay, so what I think the best way to highlight this is, because it's quite difficult to infer from this. If we look at the chart and put it on impact value and do that. Actually, I'm going to get rid of those big numbers because they don't really, they're very small sample sizes and don't really mean anything. So if we just make this 1 to 12, let's say, and regenerate the report. Right, okay, that's a bit more meaningful. So now we've got the control, which has not had a wind operation, is right on 1, impact value of 1. And there's 182,000 runners who haven't had a wind op. But we can see, if you follow that line across, we can see that every other runner group has a higher IV than hasn't had a wind op. So in terms of how often a horse and forgetting profitability for a second, in terms of the discussion about whether a wind op is a positive for a horse, it's really unambiguous. It's completely unequivocal that on average, in the round, a wind operation improves the horse's chance of winning. And you can see that very, very clearly there. What you can also see less clearly is if you look up, if I just put this on, I just want to get my sort of subset again. I just want to look, if you look at this group, which is up to sixth run after a wind op, you can see this kind of rising elevation in the impact value up to about the 5th run. And I've noticed this, I long ago noted this with the application of a tongue tie as well. Now the difference between tongue tie and a wind op is that a tongue tie can be taken off, and therefore there's kind of a confirmation bias in that group. So if a horse runs well first time after a tongue tie, having a tongue tie applied, they'll keep the tongue tie on. If it runs terribly, they'll take it off. So so one would expect that kind of gradual improvement, or certainly a kind of a flatline improvement. But with a wind op, you cannot take a wind op off after it's been done. It's a bit like a haircut. Once you had it, you've had it. And so the fact that this mimics the tongue tie application, and when you think about it in logical terms, what a tongue tie does is holds a horse's tongue down, ties it down as the name suggests, and that allows more air to go into the airway. So it actually does the same job as a wind operation, albeit on a slightly more DIY basis. So one would expect a kind of a similar correlation. Anyway, the point here is that wind surgery does positively impact the chance of a horse winning, and the horse's chance of winning on its 2nd, 3rd or 4th or 5th run after a wind op may be greater than its chance on the 1st run. And the theory behind this is very difficult to prove because horses can't speak, but it's around the fact that horses, what happens before a horse has a wind op is often they say they're making a noise, and that kind of means that the fold of skin in their throat is folding over and essentially partially blocking the airway. So they're running as fast as they can. They're having restricted oxygen, which is making it harder for them, and it can be painful for them. So the argument goes that on the first run after a wind operation, or the first run when a tongue tie is applied, the horse is expecting to hit that pain barrier at some point, or that discomfort barrier at some point, and won't necessarily realise that it doesn't happen until the next time. We're all if we've been hurt, if we've been inconvenienced, if we touch an electric fence, it gives us a very uncomfortable moment. It doesn't change our life in any way, but it's very uncomfortable, and we're very apprehensive about doing that again. And the theory here is that horses act in the same way with the memory of the uncomfortable, the discomfort that they suffered before. That's the theory. The data seems to back it up. Right, so that's the first thing. Now what I want to do is I want to look by race code, because so I'm going to change my wind op data. I'm just going to do like 1 to 3, no, 1 to 2, fine. So 1st and 2nd run after a wind operation, and I want to know, in fact, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it 0 first, so horses that have not had a wind operation, and I want to look at that by race code and see what happens there. And not actually very meaningful, but when we apply let's just do first run after a wind op, and we look at that data again, we see something very interesting. Now, ignoring hunter chases because there are no, let's just get rid of them with the filter. What we've got now is we've got a very clear delineation in IV terms between, let's look on the chart and will help, here we go. So now you can see that chasers and hurdlers improved the most. Remember the zero group was 1 across the board, and now we've got chasers above 1.2, 1.27. I mean, that's a significant uplift first run after a wind up. Hurdlers 1.2 first run after a wind up compared with about 1. Even flat turf have a small uplift. Not so much on all weather, and National Hunt Flat is really interesting, I think. I mean, if you've got a horse that's running in bumpers and needs a wind up, it's probably not a very good horse, would be my suspicion there. But what I'm really interested in is the chasers and hurdlers. So after a wind up, on the first run after a wind up, chasing the hurdlers, big uplift there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on chasers and hurdlers like that, and then I'm going to, I want to see if I can get a replication. I'm going to put my 0 back in and I'm going to go up to 5. I want to see if I can get a replication of that improvement from run to run in impact value terms here as well. So if I hit generate report, oh, I've been attacked by my son. One of the joys of working from home. It's not in here, mate. Close the door, please. Sorry about that. Okay, so yes, let's sort by wind count, and we can see, I just got to order this by group. Okay, so there's our 0 group, not had wind surgery, right on 1 just about. First time after a wind up is 1.25, and then it actually drops back down a bit before going up, and these are smaller samples now, but still pretty meaningful. We've still got 850 in that group. So, but even the worst, which is W3, and that's obviously an arbitrary an arbitrary point in the sequence, even there the impact value is 1.15 compared with 0.99 or 1 for the not had wind surgery. So there is definitely merit, as I've said already, in a wind up, notwithstanding that it isn't profitable to follow. Right, so what can we do with this? Well, we can have a look by trainer, and again, you know, people might say, well, that's a bit backfitted, but there is enough data now for us to see, in the case of some trainers, I think Skelton and Henderson are the you know, Skelton's horse, he hasn't had 520 wind surgeries. He's had horses which have collectively run 520 times after a wind operation. So that could be a horse that's run 10 times or 25 times since having a wind op. So don't think that he's you know, inclined to reach for the knife, and keep in mind also that these guys at the top generally have more runners than sort of these guys, certainly. But who let's sort by we sort by impact value again, and we can see that I just got to get rid of these small samples. 25 I think we'll go with. Yeah, great, okay, and we can see that the likes of Dr. Richard Newland, Nicky Henderson, Tom Lacey, Emma Lavelle, Nick Alexander, Dan Skelton, Venetia Williams, Lucy Wadham, and so on. We can see that they're winning around twice as often as their peer group. Now we need to consider that in the context of what their normal impact value would be, you know, if there was no wind surgery. So if Nicky Henderson is winning 2.5 times as often with horses that haven't had a wind op, then this is a negative stat. But in and of itself, it's interesting, and these guys are worth marking up. Again, they're, you know, it's very high strike rates as well. The profit column is not something that is of interest to me in this case. So I'm happy to go down here. Let's make this 1.5. Yeah, update, and maybe just put these back in actually, and select 0.75 here. Just gets rid of a few at the bottom. Not enough actually. I might make that one. No, because I don't want to lose Hendo. Okay, well let's sort by AE, and we'll take all the guys above 1, and then extremely conveniently I'm going to include Hendo and leave it there, I think. So generate report, and you know, again, the P&L is irrelevant, and the somewhat arbitrary nature of it is irrelevant as well, because this is another markup list. So this is going to be my W1 NH trainer markup list. And again, when one of these trainers has a runner which is making its first run after wind surgery, it's going to show up on my race card, and I'm going to give it an extra point for that. Now, if I haven't given the horse any chance of winning, that's not going to make the difference. But if this horse is on the short list of a couple or 3, then it might just nudge it into first place, and that I think is a much more sensible way, assuming you have the time, to use this kind of research, because it is, you know, there is a degree of convenience about it, and that doesn't mean that there isn't value, but you know, it doesn't mean there isn't utility in it, just because it's kind of, you know, these are convenient lists. But you do obviously have to be much more careful with it, because it hasn't, you know, there isn't the logic behind it that there might be with some of the stuff we looked at in 3A. But these guys are worth a point in my world. So you know, if we've got a horse which is in a 3.5 mile race by one of my sires, which is new to the trip, which has got a W1 and it's trained by one of these trainers, it's getting 2 points. And again, you know, that's enough to aid its cause, or it's not in my punting considerations, but that's how I'm kind of working with it. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And there are any number of ways you can look at data like this. The last thing I want to do, and I'm kind of just going to touch on it really, I think, is horse analysis. So if let's just reset the page here. Now, under runner, we've got a horse box, and if we've got a horse box, we've got a variable for horse, if you select that, you will get a breakdown by horse. Now, there are a lot of horses that run, and your browser may struggle to bring back a breakdown by horse if you select a large sample. So if we do last 1 year, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do race code flat turf distance 5 furlongs and generate report. How many do we get back? That's okay. So let's actually, it's probably not going to be okay, but let's try. Oh, we'll put a handicap as well. I might break it down a bit more. Okay, let's try this. So I'm going to order this by horse now, which might blow my browser up, but let's try. And the data's come back now, but there's too much still. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put an age filter of years 4 to 6, and the reason I'm doing that is twofold. Firstly, to cut down the sample size, but secondly, I want to get in order to do sort of horse profiling, you need exposed horses. You need horses that have run a lot of times. I mean, in this example, you've got horses like a Fandem and Burmese Blazer that ran, you know, 10. All of these horses ran 10 plus times on the flat last year. And if we then, I mean, if we go down to, if we just get the 10 plus, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to remove the age parameter. Oops. Because I don't care how old they are now. I've selected my horses here, and I'm going to go to a bigger date range, the last 5 years, which is essentially their entire racing career. And now I've got this. And in the case of Show Palace and Dapper Man, we've got horses that have they've won a lot of times. So what I want to do, let's have a look at Show Palace. I want to see if there's any pattern in his form that would help us to know when we might expect him to win again. So if we just first look at his form last year, you can see last season he won at Nottingham at 7-1 in June, and at Nottingham again, interesting, in August. And previously he'd didn't win last season, might have been to do with the handicap mark. So these are all things that we can look at. So we are basically looking at one horse here, Show Palace. Just take this age filter off. I can't remember what it was before. 2. Doesn't matter. Right. Okay. So let's look at race class, and we can see that class 5 and 6. Look at the win strike rate there compared with class 4. So that is an immediate pointer to this horse having a class or rating ceiling, which most handicappers do. Distance. Oh yeah, because we selected 5, all at 5. Now if we look at his overall form, we'll leave it like this for now, that's fine. Going preference, good to soft, soft and heavy. Interesting. So from good to soft, let's remove this and say from good to soft to heavy. Well, that's quite interesting, isn't it? And from hard to good. So we've got 40% strike rate there. We've got an 11% strike rate there. Now, no, we're dealing with very small sample sizes here, but that does seem to be a fairly compelling division by going. So I'm going to include good to soft to heavy as a profile preference for Show Palace. Now if we go back and look at class again, let's see if that makes any difference there. Not really. I mean, still in the lower grade, that's where he excels. But a 16% strike rate and a 33% place rate in class 4 is highly respectable. It looks like going is a strong determinant of when Show Palace goes well. What about number of runners? Some horses do best in small fields or large fields. You want in a field of 14, so you know, obviously quite capable in smaller fields, but I don't think there's any strong angle there. By jockey, what have we got here? Graham Lee and Joe Fanning, but nobody's got a terrible record. So again, there's nothing really there. By odds, and this is a bit of a weird one. It's kind of like, is it when the horse is expected or not? I mean, you can see that the fact that 5 furlongs on softish ground is not really lost on the market, for all that he's won. I mean, you know, at short prices, remarkable performance. So that's interesting. Headgear, cheek pieces, but without any headgear is fine. So again, I'm not going to get hung up on that. Weight, some horses can carry weight better than others. That you can see he's won at the bottom of the weight range twice and the top. So again, there's nothing there. Official rating, I think, is kind of ties in with race class. And if I just sort this from high to low, he did win off 84. But you can see that most of the wins are 73 or below. Now I just want to know, it'd be interesting to know what rating he ran off last time, because if he's in the 80s now, he won off 76 here. So and that was, is that his most recent run? Yes. So and he was, where did he finish there? Finished 4th there. Beaten a couple of lengths. So he ran a very respectable race off 76, and he's going to drop a couple of pounds for that. So he's kind of getting back into the zone again. I kind of, less is always more, and part of me wants to add in a ceiling here of say 80, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it as it is. I mean, you can see that most of his wins are sort of 73 or below, and I'm just going to look on, because we don't get the revised mark on GGs at this stage, although we may be picking that up very soon. I just want to see what he dropped to after that last run. So dropped a pound for that to 75. So he's definitely getting back into that sort of zone where he can be effective. And if they run him, let's say he's not fully wound up first start of the season, or the ground's a bit quick or whatever, he might well drop down to low 70s, and then he's going to be absolutely ready to go. Pace is interesting. Run style can be. This null means we weren't able to score that run. The in-running comment didn't make any sense, essentially. He's an interesting horse. I mean, there aren't that many who have a very good win record. One is held up, so a very good win record from the back, and also when leading or racing prominently. He's tactically extremely versatile, and it looks like class and going are the things with this guy. Now you can save this as an angle, but you're probably going to end up with 1,000 angles, and that's going to slow our processing down. But B, it's going to be less useful for you. What I would tend to do in a case like this is I would use my tracker. So I'm just going to open that up in another window here. Punch in Show Palace, and I'm going to add Show Palace to my tracker. I'm going to roll down to him, and I'm going to add some notes. Horse profile, good to soft or softer, 5 furlong handicaps, OR ceiling 80 ? Update. And what I might actually do there is I might just put the the right, where are we? Sorry, I might just put the summary data in there. So 10 from 24. That's what I want to say. 10 wins. 10 from 24 plus 24.71 AE 2.21. Update. Okay, so now he's going to appear. I'm going to get the yellow star on my race card, and I'm going to click on. I'm going to hover over that, and I'm going to get this note that says horse profile, good soft or softer, 5 furlong handicaps, and I just check, you know, what's the going today? Is it a 5 furlong handicap? What's his official rating? And he's the kind of horse that I'm probably going to bet if the conditions match. And there are any you know, that was, we started off with 5 furlongs here, and then we picked out a horse that had plenty of runs from which to kind of demonstrate a profile preference, and we quite quickly got to this horse. Now in an hour, if you weren't talking about it, if you were just getting on with it, you could easily find 10 of these horses. Again, I think if you're looking at kind of extreme scenarios, maybe 7 furlongs and 9 furlong races are quite specialist on the flat. Those straight track races at Newcastle, 7 furlong handicaps at Newcastle on the straight or weather, 6 furlongs as well. You find some real specialists there. So we're looking for specialists, and you know, any other additional information around that can support their specialism. I think I'll leave it there for today. So we've covered a bit about sires and a bit about wind ops, and a little bit about horse profiling, and I've talked about the value of a kind of a markup angle rather than a you know, a systematically followed approach. And I think pretty much all that I've talked about in this particular bonus module is kind of in that mould, with the possible exception of the horse profiles. And again, you know, even there, if you want to consider the horse in the context of the race still, even if the conditions suit him. If they suit another 2 or 3 horses in the race, and this one's 6-4, you know, probably you're going to acknowledge that he may very well win, but he's not offering any value, and that's, at the end of the day, it's always going to be value judgments. All right, we're getting up to 50 minutes. How did that happen? Apologies. That's more than enough for this video, and indeed for this series. I hope you've got plenty to go at in terms of researching angles within Query Tool, and I wish you all the very best with your analyses. I hope you find some real nuggets. Go and get to it, and if you fancy sharing any of them, please do. If you want to keep them to yourself, I understand that as well. This has been Matt Bisogno saying thank you very much for watching this and reading this series, and goodbye for now.